Good afternoon, committee. Thanks for joining us. Our order of business today is pretty simple. A hearing on House Bill 2168 on industrial hemp. So let's get started and call on Kyle Hamilton to give us a brief on the bill. Welcome back to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Under current law, the Kansas Commercial Feeding Stuffs Law regulates the sale and distribution of commercial feed in Kansas for livestock, poultry, and pets. New Section 1 would expressly allow the manufacture, transportation, importation, sale, and storage of any commercial feeding stuffs that include hemp fiber, grain, or seed, except when such hemp materials are determined by the Secretary to 1, be misbranded or adulterated, 2, contain or possibly contain any substance injurious to public health or the health of livestock, poultry, or pets, or 3, be sold, offered, or exposed for sale in violation of any of the statutes contained in the Commercial Feeding Stuffs Law. That's a fun term to use, feeding stuffs. Section 2 of the bill would amend the definition section of the Kansas Commercial Industrial Hemp Act to create a definition for hemp fiber, grain, or seeds. And you can find that on page 2, line 11 of the bill. Current federal and state law exempt certain parts of the cannabis plant from the definition of marijuana. The bill's new definition of hemp fiber, grain, or seeds is based on such existing federal and state exemption language. One part of why I bring that up is because personally, I don't love the way that language is organized. I don't know if it's very clear, but that is what is in the federal law and what we have used in the state law, both for our Controlled Substances Act and for our industrial hemp exceptions. So it's been reproduced here in this bill as well. It's what agencies are used to interpreting, so we kept it as is for this new definition. Section 3 of the bill amends the requirements of Kansas's commercial industrial hemp program. Section 3 on page 4, line 1, would allow the use of performance-based sampling when inspections are conducted, which does not require each lot to be sampled and tested. Additionally, Section 3 on page 5, line 28, would set the Act's licensing period to at least 2 years and cap the licensing fee for such period at $500. And then just a quick step back about the licensing and registering. The Kansas Department of Agriculture licenses and regulates hemp producers, and then the State Fire Marshal registers and regulates hemp processors. Transportation of industrial hemp and hemp products, that's also regulated by the State Fire Marshal. So again, for the licenses under KDA, the growers, the farmers, the licensing period is going to be extended to 2 years with a licensing fee cap at $500. Jumping to Section 4 on page 6, line 1, it would make a similar change to individuals who are registered as hemp processors by the State Fire Marshal by setting registration periods of 2 years and a fee not to exceed $500. Under current law, a hemp processor who engages in the extraction of cannabinoids from industrial hemp must be fingerprinted and subject to a state and national criminal history record check. Section 4 on page 8, line 24, would require the State Fire Marshal to grant an exemption from such requirement for processors who only manufacture hemp products that are derived from hemp fiber, grain, or seeds. Section 5 amends the current list of prohibited hemp products to remove references to products intended for animal consumption. And remember that under new Section 1 of the bill, commercial feeding stuffs would be allowed to contain hemp fiber, grain, or seed. Section 6 would amend the definition of grain to include hemp grain. You can find that on page 10, line 10. Such amendment would allow hemp grain to be inspected, sampled, stored, weighed, and graded the same as other grains in Kansas. House Bill 2168 would become effective upon publication in the statute book. And with that, I'd be happy to take any preliminary questions.
questions for Mr. Hamilton? Saying none, thank you. Oh, sorry. Oh, Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems like this is generally a bill that's reducing regulations and fees, and so I'm just wondering about the fiscal note and the 4.5 FTEs. I mean, if we're going in the direction of generally deregulating hemp, I'm not really understanding why we're adding employees on the fiscal note. Is that a question for you or for the proponents?
An interesting discussion, I think, to have on following conferees.
I think that would be good, yeah. Hold that question and maybe I'll call on you based on testimony. So, Representative Murphy, just making sure, okay. And Representative Carlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kyle, would you go over the fingerprinting again? Tell me where it is. You were going kind of fast. Do you go faster as you go? I can't. Just go back over that section. Tell us where it is, and let me look at it with you.
So it would be on page 8 of the bill, starting on line 24, you can see the language that's been added stating that the state fire marshal shall grant an exemption from the general fingerprinting and criminal history record check requirements. And those requirements are found just a little bit up above there in subsection H for processors who only manufacture hemp products that are derived from hemp fiber, grain, or seeds.
So what we're saying is that they are exempt from fingerprinting if they're growing it for industrial hemp.
If they are manufacturing products that are only being created using the grain, fiber, or seeds, and the way that term is defined, that's not the part of the plant that contains the THC cannabinoids.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions? Thank you, Kyle. All right. And we do the fiscal note, so it looks like at least one of us have found it. So there's not a fiscal note attached to it, the brief?
Oh, not my copy.
Oh. It's online. Bring your computer.
No, I didn't.
Rhetorical question. No, I know. All right. Okay, we will open up now proponent testimony. And the first up is Representative Christy Williams. And Representative Williams has a busy schedule, so she needs to exit as soon, and so we'll try not to drag us out anymore. So welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this committee here today. It is something that is of particular interest for Kansas. It is something that is emerging as an industry in Kansas, but it needs our help. If we want Kansans to have an opportunity to expand in industry, if we want our Kansans to try new types of crops and new types of innovation, then we need to really look at what types of regulatory environment we have and be sure that it's not that it's assisting in growth and not prohibiting growth. We all know there are federal regulations that would either prohibit or deter many activities, but there are simple steps, incremental steps we could take here in Kansas to ease the regulatory burden for some of our growers, processors in Kansas. In my own hometown, there is a Midwest hemp technology company that has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get this company up and going. And again, they are have considerable restraints in expensive fees, in the fingerprinting, in the regulatory environment in which they come in and look at their barn and have them do all kinds of changes that you would not find for any other type of crop grower. So what can we do in this bill is what I would leave with. What are the steps that we could take in Kansas that would just be introductory steps that would help our businesses? Would it be changing the definition? Would it be taking away some of the regulatory restraints? Would it be lowering the fees? Anything that this committee can do, even on an incremental basis, would be of a benefit to our Kansas growers and producers. And thank you so much for the opportunity to provide proponent testimony today.
Thank you, Representative, and we know you have to go, so thanks for being here. Up next, Robin Bonsall. Welcome to committee.
Members of the committee, thank you very, very much for the opportunity to be here today and share my testimony in support of House Bill 2168. Gosh, since 2016, early 2017, when my friend and I co-founded Kansans for Hemp, I have been more of a quiet observer of this legislative process, listening and learning as hemp bills, cannabis bills have been introduced and killed for various reasons, waiting for that bill to be introduced that aligns and resonates with my personal hemp dreams. I stand before you today because I believe House Bill 2168 is that bill. It resonates with me, it exceeds my expectations, and it fills me with hope. Can you believe in a future that you can't see and you can't experience with your senses yet, but you have thought about it in your mind so many times that your brain is literally changed to look like that dream, that event has occurred? Ask me about my hemp dream, and my brain knows exactly what that looks like. This, for me, is year 2 of my personal 10-year hemp vision. In 2025, springtime, my husband and I will break ground on our dream home, our forever home, nestled on 18 city acres of future cropland. When complete, our dream home will be fully insulated and finished with hemp-based products. We would love it if our dream home was built with as much Kansas-grown hemp as possible. I'm passionate, to say the least. Today, my hemp dream feels more vivid than ever because House Bill 2168 has the promise to move Kansas's agricultural hemp industry forward exponentially this year. Now to talk about the hard things. The industrial hemp program with KDA has seen steady decrease in farmer participation since the Farm Bill of 2018. It is now 2023. Kansas has 4 agricultural hemp processing facilities with the capacity to process over 7,000 acres of agricultural hemp, fiber, and grain annually. This year, our friends from South Bend Industrial Hemp, who you met presenting yesterday, they shared that so far they have contracted only 1,600 acres this year. They have the capacity to process 7,000. They've only contracted 1,600. That capacity is only 30%. We can do better. This program should be growing, not withering. My hemp dream looks like House Bill 2168 passing either as written or with the balloon amendment my friend Kelly Ripple, co-founder of Kansans for Hemp, submitted this week. But first, I would love to address some concerns I have with the fiscal note, 3 of which I will talk about here, and then others are in my written testimony. Number 1, if third-party testing can be an option, there are fees that would be around $45 instead of $300 as stated in the fiscal note. $45 versus $300, that's pretty significant. Number 2, if licensing fees could be $250 to $300 a year or $500 every other year, That is significantly different from $1,200 annually plus $300 in testing fees. And that would mean more small 10 to 30 acre farmers can enter the hemp industry and have a greater chance of profitability in the first few years. Number 3, if Kansas can mirror Montana's industrial hemp program, like our friends at South Bend Industrial Hemp said yesterday, Kansas is primed to thrive in the agricultural hemp economy. 1 full-time employee position, as opposed to 4.5 positions stated in the fiscal note, focused solely on hemp and educating law enforcement and future hemp farmers. That is more fiscally responsible to grow and stabilize KDA's industrial hemp program over the next 2 to 3 years. Agricultural hemp is Kansas's future. My hemp dream is to be part of innovations in food, fiber, textiles, and even greenhouse gas research for reduction. That can be the future of Kansas, and that future can be now if you support House Bill 2168. Thank you very much. I can stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Any questions for Ms. Bonzel? Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'll just ask the same question I asked earlier. Do you know how they came up with the 4.5 FTEs in the fiscal note?
From what I understand, their intention would be to hire folks to process what they have considered a priority of over 3,700 new products that would be introduced in this bill. My colleagues and I find that to be curious because the products that they would be referencing are finished products, manufactured or retail products. This bill has nothing to do with retail products. It has to do with the agricultural growing and processing. So I believe that that is where they arrived at that number. I don't believe that should be included in this bill. I believe that should be addressed in another bill, specifically possibly House Bill 2451 that talks about finished CBD products.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Chairman. Robin, appreciate your passion and your testimony. What are your roadblocks? I mean, I'm sure there's many. I mean, like regulation-wise or definition-wise or things like that. What are some of the things that you're facing that would help smooth this out?
Thank you. Good question. 2 roadblocks that affect me personally. The fees. We are not 3- and 4-generation farmers, my husband and I. We are hopefully new farmers that will be entering the industry, and agricultural hemp is our way to that. So right now, the fees being $1,200 or essentially $1,500 with the $300 testing fee, that's a risk that we just can't take right now. So if those fees were reduced, the rewards, the potential rewards would outweigh those risks in the first few years. Another is the definitions of what currently is industrial hemp in this bill. If we could see a differentiation between agricultural hemp and industrial hemp. Agricultural hemp is fiber and grain or seed. Industrial hemp is the cannabinoids, the CBD. Those would vastly help improve what we are struggling to be able to do as future farmers.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Other questions? Thank you. If you'll be available in case we have some follow-ups. Up next is Sarah Stevens-Selman. Welcome to committee.
Welcome. Thank you for having me, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm very excited to be here. I spent a year in this building in the late 90s as an intern for the House Majority Leader, Kent Glasscock. I worked for Jennifer Schmidt and Kelly Levi, and being here today, I'm just reflecting on that time and how consequential it is, and also how monumental it is to get to this moment, to get here in front of you with a bill that has such a possibility for such impactful change, to have a committee hearing on it, and to use the momentum that got us here today to move forward. And And I want to really thank Representatives William and Blue for listening to us as their constituents, taking bold and positive action to make change, and getting us to this point here today. So thank you very much. As the chairman stated, my name is Sarah Stevens. I'm here as the president of the Kansas Hemp Consortium and also CEO of Midwest Hemp Technology, both Kansas-based companies focused on production and processing of agricultural hemp. Robin used that term. I'd like us to all use that term. That is hemp grown for grain and fiber, not cannabinoids. I join you today in support of the proposed updates to HB 2168 and believe they are absolutely essential to scale agricultural hemp production and processing in Kansas. For 4 seasons, or since the crop's reintroduction in Kansas, I have been conducting and overseeing research on agricultural hemp, including 2 seasons as a grant-funded hemp researcher for Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, a USDA-funded research project administered through the University of Minnesota. Also, as a 5th-year producer, I know there is a lot to learn about this crop and a lot of confusion when it comes to the differences among hemp varieties and their end uses. Please take note of this distinction and ensure that you fully understand the unique properties of agricultural hemp for the purposes of this discussion. The agricultural hemp that we grow and process is for grain and fiber production. We do not harvest any floral material, which is where all cannabinoids like CBD and THC develop. Agricultural hemp grows on traditional row crop farms on large acreages and is well suited for the Kansas environment. It is dioecious. That means it includes male and female plants that pollinate and put their energy into high protein grain production. Conversely, cannabinoid-dominant hemp is a horticulture crop. It grows in a greenhouse or other managed environment with supplemental lighting, a germination chamber, and container planting. When growers are seeking cannabinoid outcomes, they grow only female plants that put their energy into floral production. This requires a man-made environment that alters the plant's chemistry to produce a high cannabinoid outcome. This process literally could not be more different than the direct seeding of industrial hemp with a planter or drill on 80 acres to be harvested with a combine and baled with a baler. I invite each of you to Midwest Hemp Technology in Augusta at your convenience. We founded this company in 2021 and have already created 4 jobs with plans for more hiring in the near future. At Midwest Hemp Technology, we would take 1,000-pound bales of hemp stalks that look very much like hay bales and break them down into hurd, fiber, and micro-ionized hemp. We actually have these sitting outside. No one comes to try and smoke them. Also today, right now, we clean and separate hemp grains that we buy directly from farmers and turn them into high-protein food and omega-rich oil for human consumption. I didn't bring them up here, but I brought examples of these products with me today. We make Hempy's Heart protein powder and seed oil. It's available at local health food stores and perfectly safe for you to feed in your kids' smoothie every morning. Today, you and I can go to Dillon's, Kroger, Hy-Vee, Whole Foods, Natural Grocers, or any health food store and buy hemp hearts, hemp protein powder, and hemp seed oil. Hemp grains are high in protein, fiber, iron, calcium, copper, manganese, and omega-3s and 6. And yet, the federal approval process for authorizing these ingredients in animals and food is stalled for food and animals. AFCO, or the Association of American Feed Control Officials, plans to approve hemp seed meal for laying hens this year. The application and research process starts from there for broilers, and then again for dairy cattle, and then again for beef cattle. But like Montana, Texas, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Oklahoma, Kansas has an opportunity to lead in the hemp grain market. We could authorize hemp seed meal and feed for poultry, pets, and companion animals today with your approval. We could lower fees to a level that encourages producer participation. We could save time and resources and still meet the USDA hemp program parameters with performance-based sampling for fiber and grain crops. The benefits of industrial hemp are long and varied. In order for Kansas to realize the environmental and economic advantages of industrial hemp, we need to remove barriers for farmers. Today, the licensing fee to grow industrial hemp is easily more than $1,500 per season and involves a series of requirements that are burdensome, time-consuming, and unnecessary. Instead of adding to the stigma that stifled the production of hemp for nearly 80 years, the Kansas Department of Agriculture should lower fees and distinguish more fully between agricultural hemp production and other outcomes. Proposed language for adoption in 2168, along with the balloon amendment offered by Kelly Ripple and Kansans for Hemp, will allow hemp fiber grain and seeds to be used as food for poultry and pets. Add hemp grain to the definition of grain. Authorize the secretary to utilize performance-based sampling when inspecting industrial hemp. Lower license and registration fees. Extend license and registration periods to 2 years. And exempt agricultural hemp processors like Midwest Hemp Technology from fingerprinting every employee. As was mentioned, today there are 4 licensed agricultural hemp processing facilities in Kansas, online and operating. That means Kansas processors could easily support more than 7,000 acres of agricultural hemp crops purchased directly from Kansas farmers this season. But with the current fee structure and regulatory environment, that is very unlikely. As you know, in 2022, there were only 533 acres of hemp harvested in the whole state of Kansas. Combined, I estimate that the 3 processing facilities operating, or 4, today represent $4 to $5 million worth of infrastructure investment. At Midwest Hemp Technology, we have spent the last 2 years funding, equipping, and staffing our processing company. We've made investments of time, money, sweat, and a few tears in our Augusta facility. We purchase our available agricultural hemp from Kansas farmers, but are also forced to source from Missouri and Oklahoma farmers, where many of the changes we're asking for today have already been implemented. Thank you for your time and thoughtful consideration. Thank you for finding solutions that encourage agricultural hemp production to flourish. I'm available for follow-up questions, and as previously mentioned, happy to show you around Midwest Hemp Technology anytime. We're committed to Kansas farmers, healthy soil, clean air, and sustainable water supplies. Agricultural hemp helps all Kansans in each of those regards. Thank you for affirming these updates and passing them through this committee.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens. Any questions? It's not right now, but stand by, maybe visit.
Thank you kindly.
All right, up next, Kelly Ripple. Welcome back to committee.
Thank you very much, Chairman Rajas. Committee, thank you for holding these 2-day meetings and for discussing this important topic. Once again, I'm going to keep my comments brief. You have my written testimony, but the bottom line is, as an appointed member of the Industrial Hemp Advisory Board under the Department of Agriculture, I have honestly tried my best, and I think others here can also they can say for themselves too that we've tried our best to be transparent and collaborative in all of this, and we just want what's best for Kansas farmers. You heard from South Bend Hemp yesterday. You know how this is going to affect them. And there are issues that have been brought up and likely will be brought up by those who oppose this bill, including, FDA approval, that we're going to circumvent FDA, those kinds of things. But I will remind you that other states are doing this, and the way they are doing this is through the FDA generally recognized as safe designation, or what's known as GRAS. And this is for hemp seed and other products that are made, as others have mentioned. This information has been shared with the Department of Agriculture for at least 4 years. Now is the time to act. Please consider this, consider the options that are in front of you, and let's get something done this year for Kansas farmers. In conclusion, I have a document that I would like for you guys to maybe look into, and it's entitled "The Lethal Concentration of Power: How the DEA Acts Improperly to Prohibit the Growth of Industrial Hemp." This was published by UMKC Law, and it cites Mr. Chris Kobach. So with that, I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ripple. Any questions? All right, you'll stick around in case if we have questions or follow up afterwards. All right, very good. Are there other proponents wishing to testify? Seeing none, I will remind the committee we do have written testimony of a proponent from Representative Tori Marie Blue and Brian Oshner. Okay, we'll go to the opponents. And first up will be Kelsey Olson. who is with the Department of Agriculture as the Assistant Secretary of Agriculture. So, welcome back.
Thank you for having me today. As the chairman mentioned, I am Deputy Secretary Kelsey Olson, and it's a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. The Kansas Department of Agriculture is in opposition of this bill as it is written. And I'm going to walk you through some of those items that we've talked about and some of the areas that we're concerned about. The bill, as it's written, strikes the word animal from the prohibited list of products that would be allowed. This, by removing the word animal, would allow hemp to be used as a feed stuff for any type of animal food. This modification could potentially be problematic for the state of Kansas. There are ways of allowing products and feedstuffs that we've heard generally recognized as safe foods through the AFCO system that ultimately then FDA also has a process. But if we sidestep those processes, we are potentially jeopardizing many industries here in the state. So if we were to test potentially dairy milk and find that if dairy cattle had been fed hemp, that fluid milk would not be allowed to enter interstate commerce. The FDA does not allow any THC found in any food products that we consume. There's no levels that are deemed safe for consumption. There's no levels that are deemed safe for feeding. So we feel that that's problematic and could jeopardize our beef industries, our dairy industries here in Kansas. Some of the other states that have allowed the feeding of hemp, from my understanding, that's largely regarded for commerce within their state and not for interstate commerce. There is and I just wanted to share, so whether or not this would be found there's a German study that's most recently published that did find that feeding hemp to dairy cattle would then potentially show up THC in the milk. So there's studies out there that show that. We would be advocates for more studies to identify what would be safe to feed, what would be safe to be found in food products. In regards to the fees, the producer fees, as you heard, they are set high. These are in line with other states. There's 42 states that have industrial hemp programs, the highest being a $2,500 fee, the lowest being a $50 per acre fee. So our $1,200 fee is within the range of existing programs. But you'll find on the page 2 of my testimony, I have a chart that outlines the revenues and the expenses from throughout the industrial hemp program. So starting with the research program in 2019, and I apologize, the font is a little bit small on that, but you can see that we had 277 licenses that first year. That generated just about $550,000 of revenues, and our expenses just were on the top side of $250,000. The second year, we also had a high number of registrations of 270, and our expenditures dropped down. If you look out across the next 2 years, you'll see that our expenses have somewhat leveled, I would argue, are fairly stable, but we've seen a significant decrease in the interest of licenses, and we've dropped to 81 and then to 61. So for the last 4 years, the interest in the first 2 years have been able to allow us to carry out the work of the industrial hemp program. At this time, we are totally fee funded for the industrial hemp program, but if, as outlined in this bill, if there was changes to the license fee, dropping it to a biannual fee and reducing it, capping it at $500, we would not be able to support the industrial hemp program as we see it for much longer. There's still a little bit of carryover, but it would consume that carryover in a very brief period of time. It was made note about the definitions. So while the language in there that the revisor mentioned is the language that is in there widely used for the controlled substance, when we start looking at hemp, grain, and seed definition, there's potentially areas of gray. What are these products that might not be agricultural products that may create potential loopholes for other potential products that would fall outside of this range. By expanding this definition, we are also concerned that this would then create some areas of confusion for our grain warehouse laws. So there are requirements on the books if you are storing grain or seed. There are requirements to be inspected through the grain warehouse program. By expanding this definition, there might be confusion in, if you're storing a product that you're going to process, are you now a warehouse? We are unclear, and we think that this broadened definition just creates additional confusion on our part. Broadly, that would need to be clarified. In regards to performance-based sampling, when we worked on the Kansas program for performance-based or for industrial hemp, performance-based sampling was not an option for testing for the USDA. Since the rollout of our program, the USDA has allowed for a performance-based process. We would be open to considering a performance-based process for testing, but I do want to note that there are very strict protocols for the USDA if you engage in a performance-based testing. We would have to meet a 95% confidence level that any lot that would be tested we would be guaranteed that they would not exceed the THC level. So while performance-based testing is an option, and we would be happy to pursue that if it's the will of the legislature, I want to note that it doesn't necessarily mean less testing on a producer's part. So with that, I think those are the highlights. I will gladly answer some questions that we've heard, but I appreciate the opportunity to walk you through and share the agency's perspective on this bill.
All right, thank you, Ms. Olson. Questions? Representative Blex.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for your testimony. We heard yesterday that, the vegetative varieties that would be feed and grain are being genetically engineered and bred to have less THC or maybe none at all. Have you guys in Department of Ag been following that? Is that something that's a reality to where we could get to a point to where a certain type of seed or a certain plant would not have any THC that might result in having to destroy the crop or some other alternative?
Sure. So I personally haven't followed that as closely as some have, but I know that there's been a lot of breeding out there for the varieties now that there's allowed industrial hemp growth across the country. I do think that there's opportunities there. I don't know that we have all the data to back that up, and we are trying to operate within the confines of what has been allowed and outlined for the USDA. So a lot of things I think could be better addressed at the federal level to really make it more successful, I think.
Thank you for that.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you, Chair. How frequently do you find, I guess what we would call hot, tests that show that it's excessive and you have to get rid of it?
I do not have that statistic in front of me. I will get that information. I know we have, every season there's been some that have tested hot, but I don't know what that percentage is off the top of my head. I'll get that for you.
Okay, appreciate it.
And usually there are people growing for cannabinoid varieties, not agricultural hemp.
Yeah, that was going to be kind of a follow-up. I've read that there's, like in the seeds, that the FDA has said that's not an issue because there's no cannabinoids in there. So, I wonder, I guess, being sort of I do realize we're dealing with federal regulations and stuff that we're crossing over, everything like that, but being a less government free market kind of a guy, seems to me like we need to try to figure out a way to make this thing go. Because it's, I think it's got a great market, and I think it's got a lot of potential, and we do an awful lot of incentives to get some businesses going, and it seems like we stand roadblocks in front of others, and maybe we need to do a little less of one, more of the other. Thanks.
If I could just, I think today is a very different conversation than we've had in the past, right? Like, we've talked about CBD and agricultural hemp in one big umbrella, and our industry is really viewing it as two. As an agency, we don't have the ability to distinguish between the two, unfortunately. And I agree, it's a roadblock and a barrier, and I wish we could address it. I don't know if this bill addresses it to that degree.
Yeah, well, I guess I'm open to suggestions.
I think we're still held up by the USDA's guidelines of, they don't distinguish between cannabinoid production and agricultural uses at this time.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. And then we'll see as time allows to maybe go back. We'll see on that one. So, Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What does it take to get to that 95% confidence level?
I don't have a good sense of that right now. So looking through the language, we've kind of looked at what some of the other states have done. There is additional requirements, potentially requirements when it would come to the variety type that's being planted. And I don't have all those specifics, but I'd happy to work with you or get you some of those details.
Okay. Representative Schling. He did so good today. I even coached him on it. But
thank you,
Representative Schlingensieben.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my question is, if Montana has gotten this plane off the ground, why can't we get it off the ground in Kansas? I imagine that Montana is dealing with the same federal regulations, and so what does it take to put regulators in a room, state and federal, and folks are trying to build these new crops and explore these new production opportunities so that we can get something off the ground that can get some lift?
So I don't know the specifics of Montana's, although it's my understanding that they are not a part of the Association of the American Feed Control Officer Group that adheres to the FDA policies, and so they are operating under a different set of guidelines than what we have adopted and established in Kansas.
So is there, just to follow up if I may, Mr. Chairman, is there some way to take this bill and to do things to it that will allow folks who want to grow this crop to do it in a way that is legally responsible and meets all the regulatory guidelines?
When it comes to feed, livestock feed, that is a very delicate line. I think that if we are talking about livestock for human consumption, there's a lot at risk for our state's economy when you look at the economic drivers for agriculture, the largest being beef production. Pork is high up there, exports, and our dairy industry is one of the strongest. So if it's the will of the legislature for it to be allowed in feed, then that could be done and we could adhere to it, but I think we would be jeopardizing our value-added products that may be then restricted and adulterated and been unable to sell outside of the state.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Roth.
So if I understood you correctly, you said you were concerned with the hemp being fed to maybe cattle, or is that correct?
Yes, I think there's concerns for cattle or beef, any kind of livestock that has human consumption.
And you're aware that there's wild hemp that grows all over Kansas?
I am aware of that.
Okay, and so are you testing cattle now for THC or something? Because you said you're concerned with that.
We do not test for that, but it is also not a regularly fed feedstock that I'm aware of. When we look at our confined animal feeding operations, that's not something that's typically out there. And I know I've seen it in the ditches, but I've not seen hemp grown in the pastures or where livestock might be grazing.
Okay, well, I've seen it in fields where cattle are at and are feeding on it, and it grows wild. And so if you have that concern, I would think you would probably start testing all cattle now for THC. Thank you, Chairman.
Other questions? Have another one? Okay.
I apologize. Just a quick one. I mean, is cattle feed the only possible use for agricultural hemp? I mean, it seems to be where the bottleneck is here. I mean, yesterday we saw all these different products walk across the table, fibers and hats and gloves and tiles and insulation panels and all kinds of stuff. So we don't feed any of that to cattle, I assume, unless a goat gets into it. So, I mean, is there a way to get this thing off the ground in some way without focusing on that aspect of it?
I understand. And what we'll do is Ms. Olson can respond, and then Ms. Stevens, I will bring you up at the end. And so we'll open to for all questions, if that's okay. I just want to keep it moving. So go ahead if you want to answer.
So some of the states that have passed it have had very specific language that it's not intended for use in animals that for food consumption. Meaning maybe horses or specifically for pets. And most recently, Texas, I believe, is the most recent one. They have announced that they are going to start looking at poultry and horses, and that falls in line with where we believe AFCO is headed, and ultimately FDA for their transition through that. But this bill does not, it just strikes animals altogether.
Okay. All right. Before you go, just, yes, go ahead. You have a comment, because I have one question.
Well, I wanted to make sure I touched on the fiscal note.
Okay, yes, that's
if
fine.
Representative Fairchild is curious still about that.
That's fine. Go ahead.
So I did want to just address the fiscal note. We did put together a note that would have an increase in costs and expenses for us. If we were to allow hemp as a feed source, for our feed inspection program, they review labels for all feed products that are fed to animals in the state. We know that there is some interest in companies providing hemp in those feed ingredient as a feed source. And so we have taken our best guess as to what we are currently doing for a feed label review. We've estimated that roughly 25% would like to add some sort of level to that, therefore increasing our labels at which we currently review now by at least 25%, thus explaining why we would need additional support staff to help review those labels and work through that process. So it's not pertaining directly to the industrial hemp program, but it would be to an adjacent program that would be impacted by this bill.
President Fairchild, is that a good answer for
now? I guess so. It still just seems like the number may be a little bit higher than it actually would be. And I mean, that was a point that proponents made, but I guess that remains to be seen if the bill gets enacted.
Okay. Just give us, Mr. Ripple brought up the Hemp Advisory Board. Give us a status of that. What's going on there?
So the Hemp Advisory Board was specifically outlined in statute to be authorized during the research portion of the industrial hemp program. That the research program has officially ended as of the end of fiscal year 2020. As an agency, we've decided that it would be in our best interest to keep the advisory board status. However, we have not had a meeting this year. We've decided to kind of use it on an ad hoc basis and haven't had a meeting up to this point this year.
Okay. Do you think, based on maybe some conversations, that we have invited guests maybe to that meeting as well? Just looking at, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of if we are making some progress based on today, but just wanted to give you a chance to get an update on what's kind of happening with that.
Certainly. I mean, we held a couple meetings last year with the industrial hemp industry and tried to work through some ideas of what would potentially work in a bill. We didn't call a meeting when we got word we were going to have a hearing. We probably could have done some pre-leg work, but we didn't. So that's something I'll take, is we could do better next time.
Okay. Representative Blex.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Follow up. Do we know what's a tolerable standard in of THC or in food stuff, and I'm assuming milk or meat? Do you and you mentioned that, and I'm seeing the difference between the representative over something of isolated grazing versus a confined feeding where that's all there is.
So there's a 0% tolerance.
Zero.
And I think there's a difference, right? If there's occasional grazing as opposed to a concentrated grazing practice, that could have impacts there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Representative Harlan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, and I think we need more research, obviously, on this, or more answers. The research may be out there. I don't have it in my hands. But this protein sack that came around, I have one in my fridge. I can put it on my cereal, and I can get extra protein, and I don't get high. Well, I'm always high, so, I'm up there all the time, so I can't tell the difference. But
ranking member, we are broadcasting around the world right now. I should keep that in mind.
That's fine. That's who I am.
Stop the tape. Mark it.
But my question is, what about the value of the protein? And is it enough of a value in animal feed? Is there a better source, or is it just an other source? Or I think we need some answers on that. I know that we need to enhance the protein in our animals, and if this is a way that's acceptable, under what conditions? I guess I'd like to have information about that, and I'd like to know that somebody's looked at it and can give me some guidance.
K-State certainly started some research. I can't speak specifically on whether they're looking at the protein. We know there's a protein element to it, but there's just not the breadth of research out there to safely and with scientific knowledge state X, Y, and Z. And so I didn't call it out on my testimony, but there's certainly language in there that advocates for more research, because in order to have more end uses, there needs to be more research to support with scientific findings across the board.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would agree that I would like to have that information before I support, but somebody may already have it. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. All right, up next, Robert Jacobs from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. So, Mr. Jacobs, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers and members of the committee. My name is Robert Jacobs. I'm the Executive Officer at the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. I appreciate the opportunity to come today and present testimony in front of you. As Ms. Olson said, we too are opposed to this bill in its current form. And what I'd really like to talk about when we discuss our concern with this, it gets back to the fingerprint background checks and criminal history checks. I'll bring you back to yesterday. Ms. Baldwin did a great job of presenting testimony yesterday, but do you remember when she showed you the diagram of the cannabis plant, and then we have the hemp and we have the marijuana? And so basically we're going to get back to that. And what we're talking about is tetrahydrocannabinols and the THC. It comes from the cannabis plant, so it is there in the seeds. Now, we don't argue that there is less of it in the fiber, grain, and seed part, and so that's fine. But if you remember, Ms. Baldwin talked about how we had interim meetings over the fall and in the winter, in December specifically. We were part of those meetings, as was all the stakeholders. And one of the recommendations that we came up with when they started talking about how to deal with the seed, fiber, and grain industry specifically was to deal specifically addressing the criminal background checks, so the history criminal record checks. So what we recommended in our written testimony, which you would see, is we still need to have an original record check done. So when people apply for that license that first time, we still need to identify, for the integrity of the program, who should not even be in this program at all. Do they already have a felony that would prohibit them from being involved with tetrahydrocannabinols? Okay? So if we do that the first time, once we do that, From thereafter, what we would recommend is, and we've spoken with the fire marshals about this and they agree, is once that first initial fingerprint background or criminal history record check is done, we enroll that person in what's called RAP back. And RAP back is, I'm going to explain what RAP back is because it's confusing to a lot of people. RAP back is a system that basically monitors criminal histories continuously. So if there is a change 2 years later to that individual's criminal history, they go off and they get arrested in California or in Colorado or in Kansas. If there's a change to that history, that RAP back system would notify the state fire marshals. The state fire marshal can look and see what that change, how that change occurred. Was it through an arrest? And that's predominantly how it occurs, an arrest or conviction. If it's an arrest that is one of the disqualifying factors to being in the industrial hemp program, then they would remove that license, or they could at least act on that at that point, okay? That program is free of charge. And so it's called the Federal RAP Back Program, and it runs off of the APHIS program. So if you know the fingerprint program, the KBI came forth 2 years ago and asked for money for a new automated fingerprint identification system, APHIS. We got money. We're building a new, what's called the automated biometric identification system. That system will be capable of running the Federal RAP Back Program. So once those employees and cultivators and processors, specifically the processors, once they do their initial fingerprint background check, we will enroll them in RAP Back, and then they don't have to go back in and have fingerprints or criminal history record checks done again after that, because it just keeps monitoring them. And we don't do this just for the industrial hemp program. This will be designed to be for any licensing that we do that requires fingerprint background checks. In Kansas, we do that for Department of Education, for the Board of Nursing. We do that in all the different areas that require civil fingerprint checks. So our recommendation to the committee, or our suggestion, would be, as you work this bill, if you want to include that piece, that RAP Back piece, that would prevent the additional cost to the processors, because that's their concern about this, the ongoing costs for continuing fingerprint background checks every time they have to get licensed. We would not have that cost anymore to them. So with that, I'd be happy to stand for questions, and I just wanted to explain that program.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. Representative Schlingenschiepen.
So, if you grow corn, you can make moonshine out of it, right?
Well, that's what I've heard.
So why aren't we fingerprinting corn growers? I mean, where's it's just I'm sorry, this all just sounds really paranoid to me. I mean, if you actually have plants that can't be really used for drug use of any kind, but this plant might have some tiny negligible amount of this in it, I'm just going to assume that we have some varieties that aren't in this category. Because it's a hemp plant, we're now looking at it from the point of view as though it were actually a form of pot or something? I mean, is that what's going on here? I mean, and what kind of I guess what I'm asking is, so what kind of a felony? So any kind of a felony would automatically disconnect someone from this program, but a corn farmer could continue to grow corn and sell moonshine, I guess. But if you got a felony for something else, then the corn farmer couldn't. I mean, I'm just trying to understand all this. I'm new to this, admittedly, so just treat me like the ignoramus I am.
No, not at all.
Please.
So thank you for the question. So first off, I think, and it's been brought up before, we can't really differentiate right now the grain, the seed, the fiber from the CBD and the flower, because under the Industrial Hemp Act, the Commercial Industrial Hemp Act, it's all part of the same program. Correct? And part of that program, part of that statute says is that those folks have to do a criminal fingerprint background check. So as far as the corn, I don't, we have to remember that it does have a THC level in it. Whether that's 1% or 20%, whatever it is, it still has it in there. And so the seeds have to be able to, I mean, I agree. If we can show that there's absolutely no THC in it, that is the will of the legislature to decide whether or not that's still needed as part of that statute, as part of that Commercial Industrial Hemp Act. But right now it is in there, and so they have to take those fingerprint criminal history checks. And also, speaking about THC, part of the reason that we did this originally, when we were so concerned about the creation of the Commercial Industrial Hemp Act, is once that crop goes to the processors, there is an opportunity to divert THC, concentrated THC, out of that. Now, again, that may be part of more of the flower side than it is the seed, fiber, and grain, but there is that opportunity. So that was our biggest concern. I hope that answers your question.
Representative Roth.
So listening to you, your big concern is the fingerprint.
That's really the only piece that the KBI is involved in, is the criminal history fingerprint background or criminal history check.
So if this bill included something that would anyone involved with this would have to have a fingerprint check, then you'd be okay with it.
That's the way it currently is my understanding. All employees of the cultivators and the processors have to have a criminal history fingerprint check.
Oh, I thought it was just the licensees that were getting a license would have to have a fingerprint check.
Well, and that may be a better answer for the state fire marshals as to who all is involved, because that's who the processors, that's who they oversee the processors.
So if the fingerprint issue was resolved, then you're okay with the bill?
Yes. I mean, that's our involvement.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate your answers. Thank you, Chairman.
Other questions? Representative Fairchild.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just more of a clarification on how the fingerprinting works or how you want it to work. Would that disqualify anybody from being a licensed hemp grower if they have any felony at all, regardless of how long ago the felony occurred?
So again, that would probably be a better question for Mr. Jorgensen with the state fire marshals. They're the ones that have the oversight, and they're the ones that determine what that those disqualifying felonies are.
Okay, because I think it's certainly the case that you can see people be reformed who have had felonies in their past.
Other questions? All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Jacobs. All right, up next, Fire Marshal Doug Jorgensen. Thanks for being here. I will say, Mr. Jorgensen, before you start, I do run a fairly loose committee, but everybody will be treated with respect. I don't want overreactions. Am I clear? All right. Mr. Jorgensen, welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. Doug Jorgensen, State Fire Marshal for Kansas. My testimony on this bill deals with mostly the background issue. It is our responsibility to oversee the processors in the state, both the agricultural side and the CBD side or the chemical side. And once we received that responsibility, we separated those two in-house. So we do charge a higher yearly annual fee for the chemical side than we do for the agricultural side. But with that all being said, THC is a controlled substance. And until that changes, our office feels that we have to treat both sides of the industrial hemp the same when it comes to THC. And so that's why we have imposed the current rules and regulations that we have on the industrial hemp program. The one concern I also have with the bill is the new definition on hemp fiber, grain, and seeds. We feel it's written way too broadly, and I think will open up the program to some misuse in the future. There's the possibility of it anyway. On the fingerprint background side, we do require fingerprinting and backgrounds on not only the licensees, but on all employees. Because again, even those employees are handling a controlled substance. To the degree or percentage, that's up to debate, but right now, we don't have the ability to distinguish between that. It's a controlled substance, and we have to treat it the same. With the advent of the federal, RAP Act program, I think that would alleviate the concerns that the industry has on fingerprinting and background. It's my understanding that program's supposed to go live in the spring of next year. So next December, January would be the last time that a licensee or a current employee would have to have their fingerprints in the background done. After that, it would not be that expense. It would only have to be done if they hire new employees. But even if they hire new employees, it just has to be done that one time, and it doesn't have to be done annually like it is now. The implementation of the RAP Act program will reduce our costs because we won't have to pay for the fingerprint checks and the backgrounds going forward. So our office has no opposition to going to a biannual agriculture process license with a fee of $500. And I will stand for any questions.
Any questions, Mr. Jorgensen? Representative Fairchild?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question is the same one that I just asked. How far back does the background checks go? If somebody has a felony 30 years ago in their past, would that disqualify them from participating in the program as a licensee?
It could, but I think current, culture and even at the state level when we hire state employees, I think we have to take that into consideration, and our office does, depending on the seriousness of the felony, how old it is, and then also, what changes that individual has made in their life would determine on whether they're acceptable to be in the program or not. So it's, for our office, it's not cut and dried. If they have a felony, depends how long ago it is, the seriousness of the offense, and the circumstances involved.
But that isn't something that's written in statute. It just rules and regulations within your office.
Yes. And actually, I think it is at the state level with even hiring state employees.
Kyle, I believe you have some insight on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I just wanted to point the committee to the bill on page 7, starting in line 20. That addresses, I think, part of this issue, that an individual has been convicted of a felony violation of the Kansas crimes involving controlled substances or substantially similar offense in another jurisdiction within the immediately preceding 10 years shall be disqualified from processing industrial hemp under this section. And there's similar language on page 5, line 6 for the producers. And I forget off the top of my head if that directly came from the Farm Bill. I believe it did. And so that specific year timeline is in place for both the processors and producers.
Okay. Is that okay, Representative Fairchild? Okay. Other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Chief. Oh, you do? Okay. Okay. Representative Carlin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here. It's nice to meet you. I've not ever had the occasion to meet you after we put you into this job, given you these assignments. One of the things I wanted to know is, and I appreciate that you would be willing to, just do it one time and per employee. Can the definition of industrial hemp be changed? And I know there's definitions in this bill. I'm not sure exactly what it says, but can we define it to separate the two kinds, like the picture that the lady showed us yesterday, where it's agricultural and industrial hemp? Are the plants look different when they grow tall and are woody stems and past the point of being used for marijuana smoking, for sure. The leaves are changed, and so is there a definition that we can give it that works to separate it so that you don't have that conflict of the THC question every time, or is there always going to be a THC question?
It's my understanding now that there's no variety of hemp that does not contain a small amount of THC. So until a variety of hemp can be produced that doesn't have THC, we're going to continue to have that issue.
But there's a level at which there's no hallucination and no, right? Is that correct?
I have no expertise on that.
Okay, our law states that we can sell products over the counter now that contain 0.3% or less THC. My hand cream, my seed that I put in the fridge and put on my cereal. And there's no hallucinogenic effect at that level. And I just don't know enough about it. Do you feel that that can be achieved in these plants that are allowed to grow bigger, taller, woodier?
I know the THC content of some varieties of those agricultural processing plants do have lower THC quantities than the variety that are grown for the chemical processing side for CBD products. But again, without continued testing by Department of Ag when the crops are in the field, we won't know what the actual THC content of those plants are. And until a variety can be produced that meets that 0.3% without going hot, I don't know if it can ever be addressed. On your question about separating the two, I think
By definition, I mean.
Yeah, I think the industrial hemp is maybe set in the Farm Bill, that definition, and it covers both the chemical and the agricultural side. If the committee or the legislature wanted to do anything to separate those two, it might be in a definition of chemical processor or CBD processor versus an agricultural processor. Because again, that's sort of the position our office took, and we differentiated the cost of the annual license for the two. Because the CBD processor, the chemical side, that's more work for us. And making sure that THC isn't diverted onto the street and things like that. It's not as much work on the agricultural side for us, and that's why we differentiated in the annual fees.
Thank you. I appreciate your approach to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Jorgensen. And we do have written opponent testimony from Ron Sieber, Ed Klump, and Shahira, that's it. Shahira Stafford. So you find that was emailed out to you. Anyone else wishing to testify as an opponent? Okay, then we have one neutral, and on the line is Nick Reneker. Nick, are you there?
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee for allowing me to speak today. My name is Nick Reneker. I am a private citizen. I'm not with any board or anything like that, any organization. I'm just a private citizen of Kansas. I am neutral to this bill, and I'm glad that the full-time employees aren't going to be going out to the pasture where the cattle are and telling the cattle what plants they can and cannot eat. I am testifying today because I don't think it is fair or constitutional, at least how our founding fathers would define constitutionality, that I can't take a cannabis seed, grow it, and use it however I want to apart from commerce. And I wanted to rewind from yesterday. As I was listening yesterday when the conferee mentioned she didn't do drugs, I was thinking how in the restaurant I help run, I'm kind of a legal drug dealer. I sell coffee with caffeine to make people high, donuts with sugar, pie, chocolate. ice cream, and unlimited refills of pop, soda, cola, sugar water that tickle the dopamine receptors, make you smile, feel good, and you want more. And these are all legal drugs like tobacco and intoxicating liquor, which are exempt from the Controlled Substances Act. So I think just, with the testimony that we've heard today, I don't think any of this convoluted mess is going to be fixed until you get cannabis, whether you call it, as defined in statute, it's called marijuana, until you deschedule the cannabis plant on the State Controlled Substances Act, which is a reserved power that the states have, that all you need to do is exert it, take cannabis off the Controlled Substances Act, and a lot of these issues go away and allow for the individual liberty and the freedom to grow this and to use it. Right now, we have cannabis dispensaries in Kansas, and it gets to the issue of natural versus synthetic. Like the previous opponent from the KBI was talking about how it doesn't matter even if it's grain, feed, or seed, because it can still produce CBD oil. And then if you look at my testimony, I took an article about the conversion of CBD oil to different types of THC, synthetic, laboratory made. You take acid, like an acid, and add it to the CBD oil, and some chemical reaction happens, and it turns into a synthetic form of THC that's being sold right now in all these cannabis dispensaries that we have in Kansas. And so people are using that, and we don't know really what it's doing to their livers or anything like the natural substance does. I've been writing down notes, so if I could just get 1 second to kind of get where I'm at here. So yesterday, she also mentioned horror stories of the cannabinoid industry. And these stories are most likely because of prohibition and overregulation. There's also the enforcement issue. Look across the state lines, how big do we want to grow our law enforcement apparatus, who are supposed to be peacekeepers, to keep this plant out of the hands of the people? And this bill, I am neutral to it, but there are lots of issues. Why should somebody have to be fingerprinted and background checked to grow a plant? Just because somebody says it's illegal. And we're not going to go into the history of prohibition or anything like that. Let's see here. Those of us who just want a government in a limited capacity, the prohibition in whatever form that criminalizes and or overregulates cannabis is wanting. And instead of the failed policy of federal supremacy of a power not delegated or reserved to the states, I encourage this body to eliminate all barriers of access to this plant for all Kansans. There's plenty of other things to say, but it is 4:54, and I know this committee likes to get out at 5 o'clock. I've been coming up, this is my, I think, 50th cannabis bill that I've testified in over the last 8 years, and we just kind of go over the same ground every time. We were told that these were two different plants, the hemp plant and marijuana, but it turns out that's not really the case. So I ask, I guess in final comments, please do research. Please try to find out about how this bill affects what you can do. You are the state legislator. You are our representatives, and you can write this policy however you want to. And I urge you to do it with liberty in mind and with constitutionality in mind, and don't fear all the fear mongering. Heck, I would rather arrest some parent for giving their kid a Happy Meal from McDonald's and letting them be on their phone all day long than I would to have this be a crime. But I'll stop, and I thank you for allowing me to speak today, and I hope we get somewhere with this issue this year. Thank you, and I'll stand for any questions.
Questions for Mr. Reiniger? Seeing none, all right. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for joining us. Okay. Anyone else wishing to testify neutral? Did you have a question for him or for him? Or
for the audience in a little bit.
Okay. Okay. I want to bring up Sarah Stevens again. And again, I really want to do a rebuttal of everything I know, and I understand y'all are passionate, and you know, we just need to, you know, respect all the way around. And sometimes I know somebody's not here on a daily basis. It's easy to But I wanted to. So I'm not sure exactly if it was Representative Murphy or one of you all can ask a question that I know she wanted an answer to, so I want to give you that opportunity. And so if you remember what that answer was. But again, like I say, I don't necessarily want to, I don't need a back and forth or, you know, to retort what the opponent said. But if you can remember what the question was asked and you had the answer.
Hemp seeds do not contain any THC. That's what the industry wants. We want to feed animals, and we would be willing to let go of livestock, and we could start with horses and companion animals. That'd be a great way to get the market moving in Kansas, and that is what some other states have started with if they can't get all the way to cattle. So we'd definitely be willing to do that as an industry, but the seed current today definition by USDA is in the grass category, generally recognized as safe. There is no THC in the seed. That's what we want to feed to animals. This right here, this protein powder that Representative Carlin puts on our cereal, I feed to my children. It is, I brought the nutrition study for you. I might pass around. That's all we want to feed. We don't. We could take out fiber if the KDA feels that's creating a loophole that maybe people would feed like leftover stalks or something or pelletize that part of the plant. But as an industry, we want to feed the seed, which is high in protein, fiber, and many other nutrients. It's a complete source of balanced nutrition, gluten-free grain, and that's what we'd like to feed to animals.
All right. So stand by, whoever else. So Representative Penix. I guess the audience is can ask whoever or whoever.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You'd be welcome to answer my question. So, in any way, would this harm the Kansas beef industry, in your opinion?
The study that they referenced from Germany, they were feeding high cannabinoid floral material to cattle, and that's where it came through in the meat. We don't want to do that. We want to feed the seed meal, just like you feed other seed meals to cattle. We would start with horses and companion animals, if that would alleviate some of the concern. In my opinion, we have a shortage of hay and animal feed going on today. Farmers are aware. So I think growing a high protein grain that we feed to the animals in the state would be a boom to the economy. But again, if they feel like interstate commerce and the cattle trade could be at any risk, we could still pass a version of this bill that opened up horses and companion animals and also limit it down to, say, hemp seed meal.
Okay, when you said there's a shortage of hay in this state, it would frighten me to death if someone fed some of this plant in other countries or even other states. The beef industry in this state of Kansas is $8.8 billion a year, and we export from this state about $1.5 to $2 billion worth of meat across the world. If it would harm in any way the cattle industry, if there's a confusion between seeds or the plant or the stem or hay or something, I see that as a risk.
Then I think we could narrow the language, to say more specifically hemp seed meal. We could take out livestock and say poultry, pets, and companion animals. There's ways to find common ground and make progress this season that would really help open up the market. And to address the fingerprinting line that's in there, I believe, Kyle, it's only to strike the fingerprinting for processors. Growers still are going to be fingerprinted. They're still going to have a harvest certificate showing that they have a compliant crop. So when you bring it in as a harvester in our facility in Augusta, all we have are seeds and bales. Absolutely no floral material. Nothing that contains THC, CBD, or any cannabinoids in our entire facility. We don't harvest floral material at all.
You did? Okay. Any other questions for those in the audience? Very good. Thank you again. Thanks for being here. Thank you all for being here, and I will close the hearing on House Bill 2168. We will have a meeting tomorrow, so please stick around. I think it's going to be interesting on the dairy study by Aimpoint. Comes from the state of Kansas, and where we are with dairy. No meeting scheduled Friday, and no meeting scheduled next Monday or Tuesday. Next Wednesday, we will have a hearing on Senate Bill 120, as well as House Bill 2437. Senate Bill 120 is the mirror for what we had about the municipalities extending their payments from 20 to 30 years for their big purchases. The other one is a pet animal bill that was introduced into Commerce Committee late this session that we have received. So also I'll pass this around for this on the protein powder for that. So anything else for the good of the cause? Seeing none, we are adjourned until tomorrow at 3:30.